The old house creaked. Shadows danced on the dusty floorboards. 10-year-old George stared at the wall. His parents had just ripped off the old wallpaper. Behind it, a tarnished mirror reflected his frightened face. It was an unsettling antique, framed in dark wood. Behind the mirror, a dark, almost black stain seeped into the wall. It looked like a shadow frozen in time. George shuddered. He didn't like the mirror. He didn't like the stain. A cold shiver ran down his spine. "It's creepy," he whispered, backing away. His mom smiled. "Just old houses, Georgie," she said. "They all have their quirks." But her voice wavered. George could tell she felt it too. The house held its breath. A silent warning. George had always attracted unusual friends. Kids the other children found strange. After the move, it didn't take long for George to find a new friend, Sebastian. He was tall and thin, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Sebastian was different. He always knew what George was thinking. He always knew what George was feeling. One day, George got into a fight at school. He blamed Sebastian, said Sebastian told him to do it. But when the teachers asked, no one had seen Sebastian. George's parents were worried. "Are you sure Sebastian is a good influence, Georgie?" his dad asked, his brow furrowed. George just shrugged. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to be alone again. George's mom arranged a sleepover. She wanted George to feel settled, to make friends. Sebastian's mom, Maggie, was a tall, gaunt woman with long, bony fingers and a nervous laugh that set George's teeth on edge. She kept talking about Sebastian's doctors and how he'll outgrow it. Outgrow what? George wondered. What was wrong with Sebastian? That night, George couldn't sleep. He kept hearing whispers coming from the living room. Sebastian and his mother, their voices low and hushed. It was like the banking were speaking in another language. He crept closer, peeking through the crack in the door. A flickering light like a candle danced in the bathroom. But when George pushed open the door, it vanished. Section 4. Troubling Dreams and Sleepwalking. Maggie disappeared the next day. No goodbye, no explanation. The phone number she'd given George's mom was disconnected, just gone. That night, George's mom had a dream, a vivid, unsettling dream. She dreamt of Maggie, holding a giant snake. The snake coiled around Maggie's arms, its scales glinting in the moonlight. George's mom had always been terrified of snakes. Then, the sleepwalking started. George's mom walking around the house in the dead of night, her eyes wide open but vacant. One night, George woke to the sound of knocking, rhythmic, insistent knocking coming from inside the wall. He found his mom standing by the wall, her hand raised, knocking. When she turned, her eyes met his. Empty, soulless. A shiver ran down George's spine. He knew something was terribly wrong. Section 5. Unsettling Discoveries. Weeks turned into months. The sleepwalking continued. Each night, George's mom would stand by the wall with the antique mirror, her fingers tracing the outline of the dark stain behind it. One day, George found his dad in the attic, pulling down dusty boxes. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm finding that mirror," his dad said, his voice tight. "The one in your room." "Why?" George's voice was barely a whisper. He already knew the answer. His dad's eyes were dark with fear. "That stain, Georgie," he said, his voice trembling. "It wasn't there before. It looks like a handprint." George felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He looked at the antique mirror, its surface cloudy and dark. He saw a figure standing behind him. Sebastian. His piercing blue eyes seemed to burn into George's soul. A slow, cruel smile spread across Sebastian's face. And then, everything went black.